Welcome back to Giant Monster Games. My name is Adrian, and today we are revisiting the Izzet Delver deck I did a while ago, and we're turning it into an Izzet Pyromancer deck. So that's what we're actually doing. But before we actually break the entire new deck down, I would like to throw a huge shout out to all of the Patreon supporters. You guys are making videos like this one possible on a weekly basis. Thank you so much. If you would like to join the madness that is Patreon, there is a link below this video where you can actually go and do that. Helps out the channel. And before I actually go any farther, I would like to throw a super special shout out, Elixir of Immortality. Please ask your local doctor to see how Elixir of Immortality could be right for you. What exactly is Izzet Delver or Izzet Pyromancer? Well, Izzet means it is a blue and red deck. There are some other things that make the archetype of Izzet specific. In this case, we're just going to call it as a two-color combination, so it is blue and red, and Delver of Secrets and Young Pyromancer are both cards that happen to be in this deck. So what exactly does Delver Secrets? Well, Delver Secrets is a 1/1 human wizard creature that, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may look at the top card of your library, and you may reveal that card. If it is an instant or sorcery, transform Delver of Secrets. He transforms into Insectile Aberration, which is a giant 3/2 flying creature, which we usually can get for 1 mana. So this guy is really good. Seeing as how we have a lot of instant sorceries in deck, 27 to be exact, if you're wondering the exact number here. So it is really easy to flip him into a 3/2 flyer. So early games, we can be swinging in for 3 to the face every single turn because Modern doesn't have a lot of flying creatures, so usually evasion is a really good way of getting damage in. And then Young Pyromancer, which is the more targeted win condition of the deck now, is whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we get to put a 1/1 red elemental creature token onto the battlefield. So with an army of elementals, we are going to swing in and hopefully overwhelm our opponent, making it so they are not going to have a good time by just dealing with a ton of value stuff. But these are not our only win conditions. We also have Thing in the Ice, which is fantastic if you've ever played against it, and Wandering Fumarole, like a pastry, just a delicious pastry wandering around. Fumarole, now with raisins. Both of these cards are kind of ticking time bombs for our opponent. So Thing in the Ice is a 0/4 for 2 mana with Defender, so it can't even attack in. But it has something really interesting. So when it comes into play, it gets 4 ice counters on it. And whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, again, we have 27 of them, should be easy to do, we get to remove an ice counter from Thing in the Ice. When it has no more ice counters, we get to transform it, and it transforms into Awoken Horror. That's right, it is a 7/8 that when it transforms into Awoken Horror, return all non-horror creatures to their owner's hands. That's right, I don't know how you win through this because that is a giant, scary, scary, scary monster that just made everything else go away. And then something else to note is if we do transform this, say, on our first main phase, usually it's already been around for a turn or two, and when it transforms, it doesn't leave play. It doesn't have Summoning Sickness. It just turns into something better, so we can still swing with a 7/8 after we bounce everything else to your opponent's hand. Absolutely fantastic. This is probably the best win con if your opponent can't deal with it, because swinging with a 7/8 is really freaking hard for your opponent to deal with. And then our Wandering Delicious Pastry Monster is a land, so it is going to be producing blue and red mana for us, which is fantastic. But it turns into, if we pay 2 blue, red, it turns into a 1/4 blue and red elemental with the ability of pay 0, switch this creature's power and toughness. So it can be a 1/4 blocker if we need, or it can be a 4/1 beater if we need. Generally, I'm making it a 4/1 beater and making my opponent's face feel like a boxing bag. So that is what our pastry monster is actually doing. And yes, that's how we're actually aiming to win with the deck. But we do have a whole bunch of spells, so let's start talking about them. They come in a variety of flavors. The first one is Drawing/Fixing. We have Serum Visions, Opt, and Faithless Looting are our fixing/drawing cards. Serum Visions and Opt are actually drawing us cards. They replace themselves when we play it. Faithless Looting just allows us to filter our hand a little bit. So they are basically our way of making sure that we always have the counter, the removal, the other spells, the stuff we actually need to be playing. They're making sure that we're getting into those cards as fast as humanly possible and making sure that our draws aren't dead normally. Next, we have a bunch of counter spells. We have 3 Mana Leaks, 2 Negates, 1 Logic Knot, and 1 Condescend. Now, again, all of these are aiming to counter spells, specifically spells that we don't think we can deal with or that we can kind of put our opponent off on tempo, because we're kind of trying to be a control deck, but we're not a hard control deck. I mean, obviously, you could be running Cryptic Command in the deck because that would be way better. We don't have that, so we're kind of just a soft control deck. So, Mana Leak, you know what that does. Opponent has to pay 3 mana, otherwise they don't get to play their spell. Negate counters target non-creature spell. Logic Knot is really good because it allows us to remove cards out of our graveyard and really counter stuff. It's realistically our mid to late game counter because we can basically counter anything that kind of becomes a threat once we get to turn 5, 6, 7, where we've actually dumped a ton of stuff into our graveyard. We can just make sure that our opponent can't play anything. It's actually really good, the card to hold on to until late game. And then Condescend allows us to counter plus scry. Even if we don't get to actually counter the spell, we still get to scry, which is important. Again, kind of a late game card as well. I kind of considered swapping this out for Logic Knot, but there is some cards that can easily replace this, so we'll talk about that in the upgrade section. The next cards we have are Burn/Removal. We have Lightning Bolt, Electrolyze, and Roast. So Bolt, pretty obvious, does 3 damage to any target. Electrolyze deals 2 damage divided as we choose amongst any number of 1 or 2 target creatures and or players, and technically planeswalkers as well, and then we get to draw a card. So we can use this to ping off 2 1 toughness things, or we can put 2 damage to something, or 2 damage to our opponent's face. You get it divided if ever you want. Really good, and it gets to draw us a card. So it does allow us to burn draw, which is actually pretty nice. And then Roast is specifically for creature removal, which is why we only have 1 in the deck, because we never want to draw into 2 of these. We don't ever want 2 of these unless we know we're against a really big scary creature deck. We're going to be using this to take down stuff like Tarmogoyf or Thought-Knot Seers, or other big old Eldrazi creatures that have toughness of 4 or 5, which is pretty normal across the board. It just gives us a little bit of removal for those kind of cards. And then our final section of spells are just utility spells. We have Vapor Snag, Abrade, and Izzet Charm. So all of these cards, again, we're running 2-1-1 because we don't really want to see more than 1 Izzet Charm ever. We don't really want to see more than 1 Abrade ever unless we know we're against artifacts, which we can then side more in if we want. Vapor Snag gets rid of an attacker or a blocker or a card that's on the table that's annoying for us. We can just bounce it to our opponent's hand, which is very handy. Abrade is main board hate for artifacts / creature removal if we do need to use it for creature removal, because sometimes you run into the case where your opponent doesn't have artifacts. Still useful in this case, really, really handy. Especially with the rise of Affinity, we just kind of want a little bit of mainboard hate just to be safe, because you never know when you're gonna run up against Affinity. And then lastly, Izzet Charm. Izzet Charm does a little bit of everything, but it doesn't do many things very well. It is counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. Sometimes relevant, not always relevant. Deal 2 damage to target creature. Again, 2 damage is not always enough to kill everything, but sometimes it is. Or draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards, which I find I use it for this one actually quite often. It's a card we have in the deck because it has a bunch of utility and it does everything okay. I'm not sure how I feel about this card sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, you know what? It's handy, it's really good. And other times I'm like, this is the last card I want to draw. So it's in the deck. There you go. It's a card that actually does something sometimes. Okay, moving over to our land section, because we have a bunch of interesting things in the land section. We have a couple of utility lands. We have Desolate Lighthouse and Ghost Quarter. Ghost Quarter, you've probably seen before. It's in almost every single deck I make. It allows us to have main board hate against Tron and other man lands. We can just tap it, sack it, destroy target land. That land's controller gets to go and fetch up a basic land of their choice. So we can use it on ourselves, we can use it on our opponent, we can use it on Tron. That's why it's in here. And then Desolate Lighthouse is allowing us to fix our hand if we get to the late game. So pay 1 blue, 1 red, tap it, draw a card, and then discard a card. Again, using this usually on your opponent's end step if you want to just fix your hand a little bit. It's an option. I find it actually works pretty well, but we don't have the strong enough mana base to have more than 1 in the deck. So we're only running 1 just because we can't afford to have more than that because we need other lands. Moving on though, we have a Shivan Reef and Wandering Donut Boy roll. We can get both types of mana from both of these cards, which is why we're running them. Obviously, Wandering Fumarole is actually because it's also a manland and a win condition, where Shivan Reef is just allowing us to get blue and red mana because we don't have the strongest mana base in this deck. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're going to upgrade it, upgrading the mana base is probably something you should do first. And then 7 islands, 6 mountains to deal with all of our mana needs, as per usual. And that is the entire main deck, but before we break down this sideboard and the upgrade section, if you want to pick this deck up in paper, go over to Flipside Gaming and use promo code GIANTMONSTERGAMES to get 10% off your online purchase. Or if you want to pick this deck up for MTGO, there is a link to Card Hoarder in the description below this video. Both of these things help out the channel directly by you playing Magic. So if you want to do that, that would be amazing. Okay, jumping over to the sideboard. Starting out, let's talk about with the cards, we have additional copies in the sideboard. We have Abrade, Negate, and Roast as additional copies in the sideboard because there are going to be times where we're going up against decks where we need more of those kind of cards. Again, if we're going against a creature-heavy deck, we're going up against Affinity, we're going up against Eldrazi. These are going to be cards you're going to want to throw in because Roast deals with Eldrazi, Abrade deals with artifacts and also creatures if you need to get rid of creatures. So, I mean, even going against an aggro deck, Abrade is actually probably a good card. And then Negate deals with non-creature spells. So if we're going against a deck that doesn't really have creatures, we can actually pull out the other Abrade and Roast and put in 2 Negates. Quite easy, quite snappy, really good. The next 2 sideboard cards, we have Ceremonious Rejection and Dispel. These are targeted counter spells if we need stuff. So Ceremonious Rejection is really good against Tron because if he's going to play Ugin, if he's going to play Karn, if he's going to play Wormcoil Engine, as is saying goodbye, I don't really want to see those cards. So dealing with cards like that, Ceremonious Rejection is really good. And then Dispel is to deal with instant speed stuff. So if you're going against a deck that has a lot of removal or you're going against a burn, Dispel can be a really good sideboard card. Next, we have a bunch of board wipes. We have Anger the Gods and Izzet Stratocaster. Now, Anger the Gods is really good against a couple of different decks. So, against just a general go-wide deck, such as Elves, it's really good. It's gonna wipe the board. Against decks like Dredge, it is amazingly good, because usually we get to wipe all their creatures and exile them at the same time, which is absolutely fantastic. Again, we need board wipers. Anger the Gods is gonna get that done. And then Izzet Stratocaster is really interesting for me, because it deals 1 damage to target creature and each other creature with the same name. So if your opponent is playing tokens, they're going wide, zang, 1 damage to every single one of their 1/1 Flying Spirit tokens. Yes, I'm thinking of decks that are playing Lingering Soul, so Izzet Stratocaster is really good for that. It tends to be really good at just pinging a whole bunch of stuff, which I have found to be really effective. And then the last 2 cards we have Tormod's Crypt and Dragon's Claw. Tormod's Crypt, again, helping us with graveyard synergy decks, just to get rid of stuff out of their graveyard. So Hollow One, Dredge, there's a bunch of other ones out there. You know when to use Tormod's Crypt, it's pretty obvious. And then Dragon's Claw is largely against Burn, because we actually don't generally outrace Burn. So we do need a way of dealing with Burn. So Dragon's Claw is a really good way of us just kind of buffering against them. Also, Dragon's Claw is really good against Hollow One as well, which matter-of-factually goes in with Tormod's Crypt. And that looks like it is the entire deck. That's amazing. But let's talk about the upgrade section, because this deck still has many upgrades that can fit into it. So, starting out with the land, we have Scalding Tarn, Steam Vents, and Spire Bluff Canal. All of these are really good land upgrades, and if you have the money, or if you have a copy kicking around, definitely throw it in. They're all really fantastic. I don't need to go any farther into this. You guys get it. Land is awesome when it is more consistent. But talking about cards that are actually really good for upgrading, we have Cryptic Command, Ancestral Vision, and Snapcaster Mage. These are the 3 big ones. These are like the 3 big cards. If you're going to upgrade this deck, these are the ones you're going to want. So Cryptic Command can easily be replacing the 2 Negates, the Condescend, and probably one of the Faithless Lootings, because Cryptic Command is just better. It draws us cards, it taps down creatures, it is just all around better than all of those cards combined, because it slices, it dices, it cuts, chops, grinds. It is amazing. If I had the money, I would play them, but I don't, and I don't really want to include them as like a 1 of or 2 of in the deck, even though I really want to, because they're still really expensive. So if you have the money, I would recommend doing that. Ancestral Vision is a way of us drawing more cards, especially once we get to the mid-game, because we're going to fire it off on turn 1, maybe on turn 2, and then in 3 turns after that, we get to draw a bunch of cards, which is really awesome. Obviously, this can be replacing a couple of the Faithless Lootings, and maybe even one of the Electrolyzes. You probably don't need to play 4 Ancestral Visions, but if you do, there's a couple cards that can come out in place of this. If you are playing both Cryptic Command and Ancestral Visions, also get rid of Vapor Snag. You do not need Vapor Snag if you're running Ancestral Visions and Cryptic Command. Probably even just the Cryptic Command can replace Vapor Snags in general as well. And then Snapcaster Mage actually replaced our Delver of Secrets, because Snapcaster Mage makes it so any of the spells that we've played earlier in the game can be replayed, because when he enters the battlefield, choose target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. That card gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. So basically, anything that's in our graveyard gets to be cast again if we want to, which is really strong, which is why Snapcaster Mage is like $75, because it is so good. I wish I had a playset of them. I wish I could put them in this deck. I wish I could do lots of things. This is what these cards are doing. These are the major upgrades for the deck. If you have the money, if you have them kicking around, if you for some reason got a Snapcaster Mage out of your Modern Masters 20 whatever, then put it in the deck. It'd be rad. Anyways, moving over to cards that are less important, but also really good to have in the deck, we have Spell Snare. This would be really good as a 1-of or 2-of in the deck, because Spell Snare counters most of the relevant cards in Magic. It is counter target spell with converted mana cost 2, which is a lot of cards. And then Search for Azganta, it's pretty obvious what Search for Azganta does. It is basically a baby Jace in a lot of ways. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard, so you get to fix the top of your library every single turn. And then if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you may transform Search for Azganta. You don't have to do this, by the way. It's a may effect. So if you have, say, 3 Search for Azgantas in your deck, and you already have one transformed because it is a legendary land, you don't have to do that. You can literally have a Search for Azganta and then Azganta the Sunken Ruin both in play at the same time, which is fantastic. Speaking of that, what is Azganta the Sunken Ruin? Azganta the Sunken Ruin is once it flips and transforms, you can add blue mana to your mana pool, which is nice, I guess. But you can also pay 2 and a blue, tap it, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them. So in our case, it's going to be an instant or sorcery because that's literally all we have in the deck. And then put that card into your hand, put the rest of them on the bottom of your library in any order. So if that's not hand fixing, I don't know what is. These are other cards I would recommend upgrading as well. Again, Search for Azganta isn't super expensive, but it's not really super cheap at the same time. Maybe get your copies now while it's still in print. So that is going to be the entire deck, though. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. My name is Adrian, this is Giant Monster Games. This has been me revisiting Izzet Delver to make it into an Izzet Pyromancer deck, which is a little bit more aggressive right now because it is just better. It is better than just the regular old Izzet Delver deck. Until next time, though, my name is Adrian, this is Giant Monster Games. Don't forget to game like a giant monster.